This is something that really the Prime Minister needs to get across, a driving mission for his government. I suppose you, as a former Labour advisor, would suggest that that hasn't been fulsome before now.
Well, up to the current moment, it's just a slogan. And interestingly, if you poll people, Labour is actually ahead on the capacity to level up over the Conservatives, whose slogan it is. So until there is some flesh on those bones. And what's interesting, of course, about Michael Gove is that he is a creative. He is a kind of bold thinker. Things like free schools and so on have shown his ability to really shake up systems. So I suspect that the levelling up paper will be massively controversial. It will be, it'll throw up all kinds of questions that need to be settled. So whether it's going to be a sort of an easy ride for the government once this is published, I doubt very much. I think they'll have a lot of fights on their hands as Michael Gove's plans become clear.
There are going to be an enormous number of fights on the hands of the government. There's the Levelling Up White Paper, this Brexit Freedom Bill. The Prime Minister's travelling to Eastern Europe this week. Does all of this suggest that potentially Number 10 are more at ease than we potentially might have thought? The idea that the Sue Gray report may well come out and then the Prime Minister scuttles off to Eastern Europe, it suggests that he potentially doesn't think his position is in all that much danger now.
I think it's the exact opposite, actually, Tom. I think what it is that they are trying to throw up as much smoke as possible, create as many diversions and distractions as they possibly can, because they know how badly their actions that will be described in the Sue Gray report have gone down with the public. And the opinion polls, again, show that. So what do governments in trouble do? They create rows, they go on international visits, they issue white papers and green papers, they make statements and speeches, they do lots of interviews, they lay down smoke. And that's exactly what you're seeing this week.
It seems interesting that the whipping operation around Boris Johnson, not just the formal whipping operation, but also the Operation Save Big Dog, these informal allies of Boris Johnson who've been working the phones, talking to colleagues. It seems that that operation has really ramped up in the last week and a half. The danger point that we saw 2 weeks ago, before that momentous Prime Minister's questions, the defection of Christian Wakeford, the pork pie plot, that 24 hours seemed to be the peak of this chaos. And it seems to have mellowed out a bit since then.
Well, nobody expected that to lead to a resignation of the Prime Minister by tea time. And I think, what we're witnessing is the classic death by many slow cuts. It is a slow death. And I don't think there's going to be a sort of single crisis moment until there is. And I don't think anyone sensible is suggesting that Boris Johnson is going to go anytime in the next few days. Certainly, maybe not even this year, but I think there is just still a trajectory we're on. There is an inevitability, I think, to the fact that the Conservative Party will not want him as their leader by the time of the next election, because he has become a liability. And what we know from history is that when the Conservatives scent a liability at the top, they will do nothing short of getting rid of them quickly. So, that's the road we're on now. It's a road they've trodden many, many times before, and I think it has only one destination.
Of course, what some Conservatives would say in response to that is that they have had leaders who were deeply unpopular before, who have managed to turn around their fortunes. Margaret Thatcher in 1982 had an absolute torrid time in the polls. Her personal ratings as well as the party ratings were very, very low, and then turned it all around in time for 1983 and got an even bigger majority the next time. I suppose the argument of Number 10 and what they're saying to people throughout the Conservative Party, because obviously that's what matters right now. The 360-odd Conservative MPs are the people who have the power in this conversation over the next few weeks. They'll be saying that they just need some time to build back respect, support, and indeed that policy agenda that we were just discussing.
Well, of course, that's what Boris's defenders will say. But I mean, the Conservative Party, either through folk memory or actual memory, will think back to Thatcher and think, well, Boris Johnson ain't no Thatcher, is she? Is he? And so, he's in a much weaker position, and he can't sort of pull out of the fire of Falklands victory. And also, of course, Thatcher was fighting against a very divided Labour Party, and the Labour Party has turned that around in the last 2 years and is now a united alternative government, which Michael Foot did not provide. So, the history teaches us one thing, but actually the reality is I think he's holed below the waterline now, and he's sinking, and that's what this week is all about, trying desperately to make us all look over there when the crisis is over here.
Well, let's talk about the Labour Party for a second then, because to me it doesn't seem like it's the most united party in the world. Of course, Laura Pidcock resigned from the NEC of the party last week over a vote about readmitting Jeremy Corbyn. Momentum have been ferociously arguing against the idea that Christian Wakeford should have been admitted to that party. Keir Starmer seems to be in a constant war with the left. And then, of course, just yesterday, the MP Rosie Duffield, the MP for Canterbury, was saying that she was considering resigning as a Labour MP, seemed to be suggesting that she was considering resigning as a Labour MP because of the toxic environment within that party for her. Is that a party that's at ease with itself? Is that a party that's united?
Well, these are all voices off now. Momentum, Laura Pidcock, the sort of the old guard are in a minority, and what the vote that showed that Laura resigned over, what it shows was that Keir Starmer has a massive majority on the ruling executive, and the vote was to keep Corbyn out. So they're not coming back anytime soon, and every resignation, of course, shores up Starmer's position. So, he becomes stronger by the day as people are leaving Labour and new people are joining who are more aligned and attuned to his aspirations to form a government and not just wave placards. So actually the Labour Party is healing, and that's not to say we're there yet, and there's still a lot of healing to be done, as events in Canterbury are showing. But, to compare our situation from even just 2 years ago, where the worst defeat for decades had really laid us low, Keir Starmer's leadership has put that right, and we are in a good position, I think, and that's partly politics is a zero-sum game, isn't it? So as Labour's polls go up, as Labour's confidence increases, as our people are looking afresh at Labour, then so the Conservatives become more divided and dissolute and less likely to win the election. So that's the situation we're in. The tables are turning at this sort of pivotal moment.
Could it be that Keir Starmer is actually learning a little bit from Boris Johnson in this respect? That, of course, Boris Johnson famously sacked those 20-odd Conservative MPs who didn't agree with his policy, made the party smaller but more united, in the same way that Keir Starmer seems to be content or indeed happy about driving out the left of the party, resignations and indeed a much smaller membership now. That seems to be following a bit of a Johnsonian playbook.
Well, I mean, the Johnson's Night of the Long Knives, it was an astonishing thing, and it was almost overlooked at the time. But I mean, some of the big beasts that he just summarily, defenestrated, it was astonishing. I think the role model for Keir Starmer was probably more Neil Kinnock, though, who showed his steel and his mettle by facing down militant tendency, and then a long process of expelling the militants from within Labour, people who had joined to subvert it rather than to support it. And I think Keir Starmer can learn from that experience, where there are lots of people still in the Labour Party who joined to try and change it into something else, and those people don't share our values and are not welcome, as many of the Shadow Cabinet have made very clear. So I think that's the lesson, is if people can see that you are tough enough to sort out your own house, get your own house in order, then they will start to believe that you might be able to fix the country's problems as well. And that's the journey that Keir Starmer is on.
I've got to say, I love that phrase, tough enough. Of course, famously, Ed Miliband said that in the 2015 Paxman interview. Am I tough enough? Hell yes, I'm tough enough. Although I think he might have said tough enough. Just finally, I'm interested with this comparison with Neil Kinnock, of course, a man who led Labour to 2 defeats, of course, modernised the Labour Party, changed a lot about the party, but still couldn't win an election until he set up for the next person to win an election, of course, Tony Blair. There's a lot of speculation in the press over the last few days that Keir Starmer may well be changing a lot about the party, but someone else in the shadow cabinet may well be the person that actually takes Labour to a final victory. Could that person be Wes Streeting?
Well, it certainly could, and history doesn't always repeat itself exactly the same, does it? So just because Neil Kinnock modernised and then narrowly lost in '92, and someone else picked up the cudgels after John Smith's death, and so on, the trajectory doesn't have to be identical. But Labour is blessed with a whole generation now coming through. Wes is one of them. Bridget Phillipson, Rachel Reeves. There's a whole cast of people now, as in the '90s. It reminds me very much of the '90s, actually, waiting in the wings. So. Keir Starmer, I'm sure, is aiming to win, but who knows? He may get two goes at it. There may be a very small majority or a minority government that he has to then tackle, and there's another election in a year's time. All kinds of scenarios can play out. But I can see a direct answer to your question is yes, of course, Wes Streeting is a potential future leader. He's a man of enormous talent.